I wanted to know if you, like me, got a bit of a shock yesterday when you discovered just how much your already sky-high energy bills are going to rise by. 10%, nearly 5 times the rate of inflation. How on earth have we allowed this nightmare to take root? Did you, like me, assume the feeling of being rinsed by the giant power corporations every few months was going to end, I don't know, sometime around the 5th of July? Is the Labour government, Chancellor Rachel Reeves, are they really going to sit on their hands as we ready ourselves for another eye-wateringly expensive winter, just like the Tories did? I mean, they've already turned their backs on the pensioners by axing the winter fuel allowance. I suspect they're going to U-turn on that. But, at least the pension is protected by the triple lock. Not so the average working woman or man's wages. And whilst I have some sympathy for a new government left little cash by its predecessors for perks to throw around at people, I never imagined for 1 minute that Labour would let us shiver and freeze or go broke trying to keep warm. Was it naive to assume a new Labour government would have ended the dilemma faced by millions of people forced to choose between heating and eating? Now, the argument the Tories gave us for presenting 27 million households with rocketing energy bills and a price cap that felt like it did next to naff all was the disruption to gas supplies caused by Russia invading Ukraine. And yet, as anyone who's studied Britain's energy situation will know, we used to buy just 4% of our gas from Russia. Since the war, it's dropped to 0. So how come the energy price cap is rising by 10%, putting essentially another £150, £160 on people's bills? From the peak of the energy crisis in late 2022 to last month, household electricity prices across the EU have fallen on average 67%. Gas prices dropped even more, they're down by 71%. According to data from the International Monetary Fund, collated by researchers at an organisation called Green Match, the cost of living here in the UK is racing away from our European neighbours. It's 660% higher in the UK than the European average between 2021 and this summer. 660% higher. And you can feel it, can't you? Back in May, 55% of households reported their cost of living had increased in the previous month, despite falling inflation rates. And I know there are lots of factors, the cost of private rentals and so on, but energy is what I want to focus on today. Nearly half of all UK households report struggling to pay energy bills in the first part of last year. Is it unreasonable to expect Labour to have a plan beyond, what is it they're doing, a measly 3% rise in the energy profit levy on the oil giants, the gas giants? The UK's energy price is already greatly affected by international markets, which provide, around 50% of our gas. Gas provides heating to nearly 80% of homes. It accounts for 40% of electricity production. And the European average for energy prices decreased from 2021. To date, the UK has continued to experience big hikes in both electricity and gas. And I just can't figure out how or why we are in this sort of opaque situation where I can't fully understand how this price cap is working. Because all I can see is that we are paying more and more for our energy, whereas in Germany, when I see electricity down 67%, natural gas down 73%. And it just makes me think that something is seriously wonky here. We've been complaining about sky-high energy bills for, more than 3 years now? And all I can see is the price cap means another 10% rises on, you should have fixed your prices. You should have swapped, like they say on Money Supermarket. Well, if everybody does that, why not make it a national policy? Instead of making every individual bill holder go online, figure out how to do it and swap, why not just lower the price for everybody? I don't understand why our system is so complicated and so damn expensive. 0345 6060 973 if you can shed any light on the situation, if you can afford light. But I'm going to go first for guidance to a man who I really hope can set us on a sensible path here, and that's Professor David Reiner, Assistant Director of the University of Cambridge Energy Policy Research Group and a former government advisor to boot. Good morning to you, David.
Good morning, Matthew. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm as you probably hear, I am frustrated by the UK's energy policy, which seems to keep energy companies very wealthy, the people of this country cold and poor, and I can't make sense of it, David. Can you explain why we appear to be on a totally different path to Europe?
I mean, let's start with the biggest problem, right, which is that there's something called excess winter deaths. So there are more people in the UK that die each winter
Yes.
than would be expected.
Yes.
Like 30,000, if you go back to pre-COVID numbers, about 30,000 a year. I'm Canadian originally, and there are more people in the UK that die of cold in the winter than die in Canada. Right, so that's huge.
That's
problem,
mind-blowing.
right?
Yeah.
And so why does that happen? So some of that has to do with energy bills, but a lot of that has to do also with, really poorly. We have some of the worst housing stock
Yes.
in Europe.
Yes.
And so, part of the problem is that what claims to be the solution, like so-called winter fuel payments, aren't anything to do with winter fuel, right? They're basically a check to, or have been until now, have been a check sold. And if you want to buy, golf clubs with that or whatever you want, that's
Yeah.
there's no strings, right?
Yeah.
So we've been spending billions a year while allowing our housing stock to be absolutely dreadful. So, one thing, any government could do, and they've tried a couple of times over the last decade or so and haven't done it terribly well, is to try and do something about our housing stock. And, so massive rollout of insulation, energy savings measures, energy efficiency measures. I mean, that, at least as a start, would be a really good way of starting to address the more fundamental problem.
But we seem to have a unique approach to the energy markets in the UK, and in the truest sense of unique, there is no one else doing it like us. And yet it also seems to be eye-wateringly expensive. So I, in my very simplistic vision, I'm just thinking, well, is it impossible to ask the new government to tear up existing UK energy policy, invest in some gas storage tunnels, tanks like we used to have in Victorian times, and address the problem face on, so that we don't have a conversation this time next year or the year after that about sky-high energy bills?
Well, I mean, yes. So, to me, the fundamentals are about, why so much of what you pay for just goes straight out
right
the roof and the walls and the windows and so on, right? So if people have single pane windows, then they're paying a lot for heating, and it's not heating them, it's not warming them up, it's heating the outside.
I used to live in a relatively new house, ex-council house that had been refurbed. And my energy bill, despite me being super cautious because I wasn't working much and I didn't have much money, was sky high. So that's a fully modern, double glazed house. My energy bill was still sky high. I take your points about energy conservation. That's very, very important. But I really want to address why we in the UK have this unique approach to energy, the way we buy it, the way we store it, that seems to be so expensive. I don't understand why we continue down this path.
I mean, the first problem is that we have been spending money. In fact, during the 2022 crisis after Russia invaded Ukraine, we spent close to 100 billion pounds, maybe 90 billion pounds on these sorts of measures. It was, it didn't really accomplish anything.
No,
it was.
No.
Hello.
Yeah. No, it didn't accomplish anything at all, as far as I can see.
Well, it did protect people in the sense that it kept everybody's bills down, but that keeping people's bills down in Chelsea as well as people's bills down in South Shields, right?
We gave British Gas nearly £1 billion clawback last year because they felt that they had a rough deal since the energy crisis had begun. Now, I have some sympathy for British Gas having a rough deal, but didn't the entire population of the UK have a rough deal with the energy prices? So how come the previous government decided it was going to give so much money to British Gas, but nothing meaningful to the people? Why, again, David, I'm going to keep going back to this. Why is our energy in the UK going up and it's going down in Europe? Why is that happening?
I mean, first of all, again, this is all compared to these huge price hikes that we all had in 2022. So they are coming down at somewhat different.
But they didn't have huge price hikes in France, did they? Their price hike was 4% on electricity. Ours was 350%.
Yes, I mean, but again,
So that's quite a big discrepancy, isn't it? When we're comparing energies, that France's energy bills went up by 4%, ours went up by more than 350%, and here we are 3 years down the line still asking why. When's someone going to change it?
But part of the problem is that there are different ways in which we deal with this problem. And so it's whether we pay as consumers or whether we pay as taxpayers, right? So in France, to some extent, you have state-owned electricity utilities, right? Yeah. The cost to that for the French taxpayer isn't reflected in their electricity bill, right? So so you don't want to make it seem like it's all the electricity companies. And the other point, I think, which also confuses matters a little bit is, you have the oil and gas companies that did make a vast amount. They did. But that's somewhat different from the utilities, right? So the electric utilities
who buy it from the market,
their profits aren't anything like kind of the Shells.
But I understand that element of it, David, because I've heard the same line for 3 years that the utilities are the people that are purchasing the energy from the market. But I just keep coming back to the same point, that's what everybody else is doing, and they're not paying as much as us. Professor David Reiner, thank you. Gary Caffell was listening to that, Deputy Editor of MoneySavingExpert.com. Good morning to you, Gary.
Good morning.
Before I get on to some tips from you on how people might ease themselves through the worst, can you make any sense of why we pay so much in the UK compared to Europe?
I mean, there's a number of reasons. I think one of which is the amount we rely on gas still. We generate renewables here, but we can't always use them all ourselves. We don't have that much in storage. And there is investment. Ofgem has announced last week, actually, a big pipeline from the north of Scotland, bringing some of that wind power down to the north of England. Lots of else in the pipeline as well. I think that's the longer term solution is being able to use this renewable energy that we're generating, more of it ourselves, rather than relying on the volatility of the global gas market.
But meanwhile, all the energy companies make profits, quite sizable profits. So I know British Gas was down to just under 200 million off the best part of a billion the year before. So it's still profit. So they're doing okay out of it, while broadly the people of this country freeze.
Yes, yes, they are. And to sort of tie it back to what that means for us. We've heard about this price cap going up, but what does that mean? Well, essentially, if you are on your provider standard variable tariff, which the vast majority of us are at the moment, for every £100 you have been paying, from October you'll be paying £110. And you can see that as that comes into the high use winter period, that's going to be very difficult for many people. Millions are already struggling, and let's not forget that we're going to lose the winter fuel payment as well at the same time.
So everybody goes to your website, sees that it's a really good idea, and swaps provider. Let me just ask you just a really simple question from a fairly simple presenter here. If it's that simple, why isn't it just a national policy? Why don't they just move us all over to a cheaper tariff? Rather than making it the burden on the individual to keep chasing down deals, if it's possible to essentially avoid the 10% increase by shopping around, why not make it a national policy? Keep everybody's bills down.
Well, I mean, the energy price cap was brought in to sort of, to do that to an extent in terms of, put a cap on bills, where it was going sky high. And for those people that don't switch, at least they wouldn't be completely ripped off because it would be, a more manageable rate, albeit, very debatable. There is a lot of talk about social tariff. It's the most vulnerable in society that are going to be hurt by this. So, lots are still ongoing about that. But yeah, going back to the winter fuel payment, what we say there is, there's going to be a lot of people worrying about that. That's up to £300 that people have been getting, that now is going to be means tested. Pension credit is one of the ways to get that. Yeah. I would say 800,000 people in the UK are not claiming pension credit, and they are due. So if you're of pensionable age, it's worth checking, because that actually, you might find you are eligible, and that could go some way to helping with these energy bills.
Good advice, Gary Caffell. Lovely speaking to you this Saturday morning, Gary, there from MoneySavingExpert.com.